The house that did not scream. The door did not look like it had been kicked in. That was the first thing the officer noticed, even as his foot connected with the cheap wood paneling and the lock gave way with a dull, hollow crack. In the half-second before the door swung open, he registered the absence of chaos. No splintered frame, no shattered glass, no signs that violence had forced its way inside. And yet, the silence on the other side was wrong. It was just after 5:40 a.m. on Thursday, August 11, 1977, when the Seaside police officer stepped into the small duplex on a quiet residential street in Monterey County, California. The sun had not yet burned through the coastal haze, and the neighborhood was still wrapped in that early morning stillness where everything feels paused, suspended between night and day. Inside the house, time had stopped entirely. The kitchen was the first thing he saw. Josephine Smith lay on the linoleum floor, her white hair darkened and matted with blood. She was positioned on her side, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her, as if she had fallen rather than been placed. Next to her was her daughter, 27-year-old Susan Harris, her body twisted toward her mother, one hand outstretched in a gesture that might once have been protective, or might simply have been reflex. Pressed against Susan's body was 6-year-old Rachel Harris. The child's small frame made the scene unbearable in a way even seasoned officers struggled to articulate later. She lay close to her mother, as if seeking warmth or safety, her nightclothes soaked through, her body marked by the same savagery inflicted on the adults beside her. 3 generations of the same family lay together on the kitchen floor. The officer did not step closer. Training held him in place, even as his stomach turned. He could see immediately that there were no gunshot wounds, no obvious blunt force trauma. What he saw instead were cuts, too many to count at a glance. Slashes and punctures layered on top of one another, overlapping, crossing, carved into flesh with an intensity that suggested frenzy rather than efficiency. He moved slowly, methodically, deeper into the house. In the bedroom, the 4th body waited. 15-year-old Renee Ferguson lay sprawled across the bed, face down, her arms twisted behind her back, wrists bound tightly together. The bedding beneath her was saturated, the mattress soaked through with blood that had long since cooled. Her legs were extended awkwardly, as if she had been dragged or repositioned after death. The light in the bedroom was still on. It had been on all night. The officer backed away, radio already in his hand, his voice controlled but urgent as he called for backup. Within minutes, the quiet street would erupt with sirens, flashing lights, and the arrival of patrol cars, detectives, and supervisors. By mid-morning, yellow tape would cordon off the property, and uniformed officers would stand guard as photographers, forensic technicians, and investigators tried to make sense of what lay inside. But in that first moment, before the crime scene vans arrived, before the media learned what had happened, before the town of Seaside understood what it was waking up to, the house remained eerily intact. No broken windows. No forced entry. No overturned furniture. No signs of a struggle. Just 4 bodies, and a staggering amount of blood. 2 nights earlier, on Tuesday, August 9, the Smith family had done what they almost always did on a Tuesday evening. They went to church. Josephine Smith was a familiar face at the Assembly of God Church in Seaside. Elderly, soft-spoken, and unfailingly reliable, she was the kind of congregant pastors learned to depend on. When Josephine said she would be somewhere, she showed up. When she promised to return, she returned. That Tuesday night, she attended services with her daughter Susan, Susan's 2 children, Rachel and Renee's sister, Raylene Ferguson. After the service, Josephine spoke briefly with the pastor, mentioning that they planned to come back the following evening for an evangelical seminar he would be hosting. It was an ordinary conversation, unremarkable, the kind of interaction that would have been forgotten entirely if not for what followed. Wednesday passed without comment at first. People miss church sometimes. Schedules change. But by mid-morning, small absences began to accumulate into something more noticeable. Susan Harris did not show up for work at the electrical firm where she was employed. Renee Ferguson failed to appear at her summer job through the Youth Job Corps. No calls were made, no excuses given. Suzanne's car remained parked under the carport at the duplex, exactly where it had been left the night before. By Wednesday evening, concern turned into unease. A friend of Renee's mother mentioned the family's absence to a neighbor who knew them well. He agreed to check on the duplex early the next morning, on his way to work. It seemed like a simple enough favor: knock on the door, make sure everything was all right, report back. At approximately 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, August 11, the neighbor approached the front door. No one answered. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a light glowing through the bedroom window. It struck him as odd. Who left a bedroom light on all night? He stepped closer and peered inside. What he saw froze him in place. Renee Ferguson lay face down on the bed, motionless, surrounded by blood so dark and thick it barely looked real. Her hands were bound behind her back. There was no sign of movement, no rise and fall of her chest. The neighbor did not knock again. He ran. Approximately 10 minutes later, Seaside police were on scene, and within minutes of that, an officer was forcing his way into a house that had become, in the words of one detective, a slaughterhouse without a sound. Detectives arriving at the duplex that morning would later describe the interior as something out of a low-budget teenage slasher film, the kind designed to shock, horrify, and thrill young audiences hungry for violence on the screen. The difference, of course, was that this was real. Autopsies would later show that each victim had been stabbed between 19 and 45 times. The wounds were inflicted with a long knife, long enough that almost every single strike could have been fatal on its own. The sheer number of wounds spoke to rage, obsession, or something far more personal than random violence. And yet, despite the carnage, the scene was strangely contained. Blood was present in large quantities, but it was mostly limited to where the bodies lay. There were no smeared walls, no bloody handprints, no trails suggesting a chase through the house, no broken furniture, no overturned chairs, no shattered dishes. It was as if the violence had exploded suddenly, and then stopped just as abruptly. Investigators found no evidence of sexual assault. No valuables were missing. No drawers had been rummaged through. No doors or windows showed signs of forced entry. In short, there was no obvious motive. What they did find, what would become important much later, were footprints. Faint, nearly invisible impressions pressed into dried blood on the floor. They were only noticeable in certain crime scene photographs, taken from specific angles under specific lighting. One print appeared to belong to a large shoe. The other was smaller, possibly a bare foot. The question lingered quietly in the minds of investigators as they studied the images. Who did the smaller print belong to? Seaside was not a city accustomed to mass murder. With a population of roughly 23,000 at the time, it was the kind of place where violent crime felt distant, something that happened elsewhere, in bigger cities, on the evening news. 4 women and girls being slaughtered in their own home was not just shocking, it was destabilizing. Fear spread quickly. Then came anger. The Seaside Police Department was small. The investigation was being led by just 3 detectives. To many residents, that fact alone felt insufficient. People wanted arrests. They wanted answers. They wanted reassurance that whoever had done this was no longer among them. When days passed with no suspect named, suspicion turned inward. Neighbors began eyeing one another differently. Parents kept children inside. Whispers circulated about strangers, about drifters, about monsters hiding in plain sight. Citizen patrols formed almost overnight. Volunteers armed with CB radios cruised back roads in their cars, speaking in official-sounding language, reporting suspicious activity that amounted to little more than unfamiliar faces or cars parked too long in one spot. Others patrolled on foot, flashlights in hand, determined to protect their streets in the absence of an arrest. For a few weeks, Seaside played at being its own police force. Then exhaustion set in. 3 weeks after the murders, there was still no suspect in custody. Family members of the victims began voicing their frustration publicly, directing complaints to the mayor and the media. Reporters started asking pointed questions about whether the local police were in over their heads. Under mounting pressure, the California Department of Justice stepped in, not to take over the case, but to evaluate it. Their conclusion, released on September 19, was blunt and unequivocal. The Seaside Police Department's investigation was complete, thorough, and competently conducted. No state involvement was necessary. The problem was not incompetence. The problem was that the killer had not yet been named. The break in the case would not come from forensic science, anonymous tips about strangers, or citizen patrols sweeping the streets. It would come from a teenage girl. And she would call not because she wanted justice, but because she wanted revenge follow for more.